Thank you all for joining us. Welcome to our Yom Hashoa program. This year has been a year like no other. We are here tonight to commemorate the catastrophic event in our history, the genocide of 6 million Jewish people. Yom Hashoa takes place every year on the 27th day of Nisan. This is the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. The observance of this day was established by the Israeli Knesset in 1959. I was 3 years old at that time, but I did not need a ceremony to remember that the Holocaust took place. My parents were both Holocaust survivors, and my mother was in Auschwitz. All of their friends and relatives were also survivors, and I cannot remember a time when references to that awful time in our history was not alluded to in their conversations. As a young child, before falling asleep, I remember thinking about places in our basement where I could run to if we needed to hide. I also thought about this when my children were little, but thank God history did not repeat itself in my lifetime, and my children did not grow up with this kind of underlying fear. In April 1992, I went on the March of the Living trip together with my husband, Jeff. We went as staff members together with over 2,000 yeshiva high school students. This was the second such event to ever take place in Poland. We visited the Warsaw Ghetto, where we saw the statue of Mordechai Analevich, who was the leader of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, proudly displayed in the village square. I was shocked that the Polish government would display a statue of this famous Jewish martyr in the center of town. But when our Polish guide introduced the statue, he made no reference to the fact that Mordechai Analevich was Jewish, and there was no mention of the fact that Warsaw was a Jewish ghetto, and that the fighters and the victims of the genocide that was perpetrated were all Jewish. It was just referred to as this happened to the Polish people, nothing about Jews. This was in 1992. Mordechai Analevich was remembered simply as a Polish citizen, and the fact that the Nazis attempted to eradicate the Jewish population was never mentioned during this trip. There was no writing on the statue itself, either to inform people that Mordechai Analevich was Jewish and that he and the rest of the people living in the ghetto were killed simply because they were Jewish. This was particularly shocking to me, as the date of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising is the date that we use every year to commemorate Yom HaShoah. The next day was Shabbat. About 1,000 of us returned to the ghetto, and we had a kumzit, which lasted for several hours. We all sat around the statue of Mordechai Analevich and sang Jewish songs in Hebrew. We sang beautifully and very loudly. People who lived in the buildings around the park opened their windows and just stared at us. Many of them were alive during the time of the Shoah. Many of them had memories of their Jewish neighbors who are no longer with them. But in 1992, when we were there was no Jewish community in Warsaw. And yet, there we were, reminding them of the Jewish past of the ghetto, even though there was no acknowledgement that Jews ever lived in that town. We are here today to remember and to remind the world that the Shoah was a uniquely Jewish event, and that 6 million Jews were killed because of racism against Jews and not for any other reason. Dr. Saul Goldman is a survivor who accompanied us on the March of the Living. Like Leah Roth, he too spoke in our shul several years ago on Yom HaShoah. He is the father of Chetfa Hubsher from Livingston. Today he is 98 years old, and unfortunately he has lost the ability to articulate his thoughts, which he so eloquently shared in his memoirs in a book called Sunset, Sunrise. Here's the book, and here's a picture of Saul Goldman. And what I would like to do is I would like to read in his words what he said on Yom HaShoah. This is what he said. Tonight we are here as mourners to do what Jewish traditionalists taught us to do, to recite the modern Book of Lamentations, the Echa of our times, to remember and commemorate, to shed tears, to recite Kaddish, to seek a catharsis for our souls, and yes, as astonishing and unbelievable as this may sound, to confirm the Kedusha, the sanctity of life, and the eternal existence of our people. To do otherwise would be to render a posthumous victory to Adolf Hitler. Jews are commanded to survive as Jews, lest their memory perish. They are forbidden to despair of God, lest Judaism perish. They are forbidden to despair of the world as the domain of God, lest the world be handed over to the forces of Auschwitz. Just as we know for thousands of years to chant at the Seder table as we recently did, that it is man's duty to remember, as though he personally had come out of Egypt, so should we lament the tragic demise of our 6 million heroes. I would now like to call upon Josh Kaplan to sing Kal Malei Rachamim. And just a note, following Kal Malei Rachamim, his son Meir Kaplan will begin the candle lighting ceremony. Meir's grandmother, Ella Cohen, is a survivor of Auschwitz.
Malei Rachamim, Shochein Bameromim, Hametzei Menucha Nechona, Tachas Kanefei Ashchina, B'mahalos Kedoshim Udaharim, Kezoar Arakiya Mazhirim, Esnishmos HaKadoshim Udaharim, Sheumasu Sheneregu Shenishchatu, V'shenisrafu v'shenitberu v'shenechneku al kiddush Hashem, al yedei hatzurim ha'germanim yamach shemam v'zichram. Mavur she'anu mispalelim li'ilui nishmosehem, Began Yastirim Mesesik Nafav Liolamim, Vitzror Bitzror Achayim Esnishma Seyem Adonai Hunachala Hasam V'yanuchu b'shalom Hamish K'moiseyem V'nomar Amen.
I'm lighting this candle in memory of my bubby Rachel Mannheimer Gross Halben and in honor of my softa Ella Gross Cohen, who both survived Auschwitz, as well in memory of my great-great-grandparents, great-aunts, great uncles, great and cousins who did not survive.
The second candle will be lit by Hannah and Aiden Bluegrin.
I am lighting this candle in memory of my great-grandfather, Yeno Adler, who survived the Shoah working in a Nazi forced labor camp, and in honor of my Bubby, Irene Adler, who survived the Shoah and forced labor at a munitions factory near Auschwitz, and in honor of all of their family members who did not survive.
Joseph Razel, Yehudit and Shaya Adler, Shlomo, Rivka, Shmuel, and Mordechai Kirsch, and Zalman and Razel Perlmutter.
Thank you. The third candle will be lit by Joey, Teddy, and Cheryl Esses.
We are lighting this candle in memory of Grandma Chanka, Grandpa Moshe, and Grandpa Leon, who survived the Holocaust in Auschwitz, in Siberia, and in hiding in Poland, and in memory of all their family who did not survive.
The fourth candle will be lit by Ariel, Eitan, Aaliyah, and Dahlia Hammerman.
We are lighting this candle in memory of our great-grandpa Avraham and great-grandma Shoshana, who survived the Shoah in Auschwitz and in Israel, and in the memory of all of their family members who did not survive.
The sixth candle will be lit by the fifth candle will be lit by Josie Jakubovic.
I am lighting this candle in memory of my Bobby Leah Jakubovic, who survived in the Shoah in hiding, and in memory of all of her family members who did not survive.
Thank you. The sixth candle will be lit by Ophir and Yakir Feilhart.
Just celebrating her 96th birthday. We're tremendously grateful for everything that she's taught us, and also in memory of many, many other family members whom we've been fortunate to name our children after, in some cases, who did not unfortunately survive.
The great-grandmother of the Feilharts, Leah Dick Roth, and great-uncle Moshe Roth will be making their presentation. Leah is a Holocaust survivor who spoke about her experiences during the Shoah 4 years ago in our shul's Yom HaShoah program. Last year in January, right before the world was shut down because of COVID, Leah returned to Auschwitz, together with her daughter and her son Moshe Roth. They attended a program that commemorated the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. Leah has also participated in the Names Not Numbers program at Kushner and has written a book about her experiences called My Eyes Looking Back at Me. If you would like to address any questions to the speakers, please share them in the chat box online. Leah will be introduced by her daughter, Aaliyah Feilhart. At the conclusion of this program, Josh will lead us in singing Ani Ma'amin.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay. So On January 27th of last year, Moshe, myself, and my son Shoham accompanied our mother, Leah Roth, to Auschwitz for the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the camp. She had no desire to visit beforehand. It was such a horrid place. But now she was asked to go as a delegate and decided to go. The trip was arranged by the Auschwitz-Birkenau Foundation and paid for by Ambassador Ron Lauder of Estee Lauder fame. J. Roots took responsibility to bring us from the airport to the hotel, from the hotel to various programs that were arranged and we attended. We had over 100 survivors from Israel, the United States, Canada, South America, and various European countries. There was a ceremony at the end of the railroad tracks where many dignitaries from all around the world spoke. And at the end, they all marched in the bitter cold to light memorial candles by the train tracks. The next day, we had a guided tour of Auschwitz, and we saw several buildings and walked around there and Birkenau. Much of Birkenau is torn now. We couldn't go into any of the buildings because they said it was not safe, and they're rebuilding some of them and preserving other buildings. In Auschwitz, we went into one crematorium where there was a bunch of yeshiva boys, local boys, I think from the 5 towns, with their Rebbe. And when I approached the Rebbe and told him that many of the Holocaust survivors were there that day, the boys were very emotional, and they asked my mother and some of the other survivors for brachot. At the end of the day, the end of the tour, we lit yahrzeit candles, and I asked Moshe to say Kel Rachamim, which he did. This brought my mother some relief and closure to be able to say Kaddish for her family and all the other Jews that perished in this place. One final remark. I was horrified to see that yards away from Birkenau, there were houses, a suburban neighborhood with children and swings and toys outside in the yard. And people were living there as if nothing ever happened. And it was so strange to me to be able to live, for young families to live so close to such a place where there were heinous acts. Now I'd like to introduce my mother, Leah Czik Roth.
Shalom, my dear friend. I will speak very slowly because lately I slowed very much down. At 97, it is kind of hard. I will not bore you, my friends. I will not bore you with long speeches, psychology or philosophy, only about my life story of where and how I was born. I was born in a small town called Brusturi in Czechoslovakia in 1925. My main education came from my father. I had no chance to finish high school, only 8th grade public school. There was no high school in my town. In 1941, the Hungarian police took my parents to Auschwitz. They took us to Poland. The Hungarian took them over the border, and there the Germans killed them. I was at home. I was not at home at that time, and therefore I was spared from that. Throughout the war's year, I had to grow up alone and learn from my experience. My first language was Yiddish, which we spoke at home. I learned in Czech public school, where we spoke Czech, German, and also Russian, Ukrainian Russian. The Hungarian, I learned only the Hungarian language. I learned only in the streets. I lived among different nations, and I learned the diversity. In Israel, I learned to speak Hebrew, and when we moved to the United States, I had to learn a new language, English. After the liberation, it took me more than 1 year to reach Israel. I came out from the ghetto Auschwitz alive, but I am impaired, damaged. All through my life, I remember Auschwitz. There was a lot of chaos. My eyes saw the SS throwing small children over the fence. I did not understand how can they throw children like toys. Only the camp, how can the children like the birthplace? Only in the camp, people throw children like, only in the next day, we were standing for Seilapel, meaning the counting, and one of my friends asked the Jewish supervisor, when can I see my parents? The supervisor pointed with her hand to the chimney where big smoke came out. And she told her, there you can see your parents. I was on the following camps: Auschwitz, Birkenau, Stutthof, and Brno. In the beginning of January, in bitter cold, the SS with their dogs and horses made us start the march. We did not know where we are going and how long we'll be there. During the march, which is called because so many people who had survived till now had no more strength to go on, and people were falling from exhaustion. My friend and I we ran away from the March of Death, rather. My friend and I ran away, and we came to a town where the Russian already took over. We came there and we hid. We were very afraid that the Germans shall not catch us again. But chance was we were on the street and they did catch up and they pushed us back in the line for going in the march. We decided, when we ran away from the march, we decided that if somebody would ask us who we are, we would answer that we came from Hungary to help the Germans. This was our excuse. I was at the following camp. Yeah, I said already. Know that we know that the government surrendered. We were marching among the German soldiers. And one time, they did not know that we are Jews because I had blonde hair and they thought that I am one of them. When by March, the German soldier announced that Germany had capitulated, meaning surrendered. We were very, very happy, but quiet. We started to think about going back home where we came from. We went home through all kinds of mountains, others swim until we reached the city of Krakow. In Krakow, we crossed the border to Czechoslovakia. When we came to to Slovakia, people from Auschwitz were there already, and they prepared rooms for us, and they greeted us. It was very nice. While we were traveling, and we were walking and we were traveling, hitchhiking all kinds of trains. We went up in the top of the train, and from there, some people fell to the death. And that's what it happens. It's dangerous. From Humane, I separated from the rest of the people I went away with, and I came to the city Hust. In city Hust, I was the last time before I took Auschwitz, and I was there by a family where I was learning how to make shaitlach, twigs. So the first thing I came in Hust, I went to see this family. However, I did not see them. They were not there. But I did find some people, some friends who were with me in the camp, and they were working in a restaurant, and it was Pesach time, so they provided me with food. When I was walking on the street, a friend of my father's saw me, he recognized me, he spoke to me. And when he spoke, he told me, I have an aunt in Bucharest, my father's sister, Czik. She lived in Bucharest, Romania. So I took a train and wore the camp's clothing with the stripes, so I wouldn't have to pay for the ride until I came to my aunt. They were very happy. They took me in. While I was there, I did go every day to the Jewish joint. But the Jewish joint gave out money for the survivors. There, I also did go to the Czech embassy. The Czech embassy gave me papers and I got back my name, Lenka Czik. I was very happy. On the lines, when we were in the lines, everybody was asking one another, where are you from? And do you know any of my relatives? One person came along and she said, she knows about my sister. She is in Budapest. Budapest is Hungary. From Bucharest to Budapest is very, very far. I hitchhiked there and I came to Budapest. No, there I left out. In the meantime, my cousin, Etu Felberbaum, and her brother also came back from Auschwitz. And they were by another aunt by the name Cyril. When I heard that my cousin is there, I did go, and she told me about they are preparing, they are going to Eretz Israel. I begged them to take me along. And my cousin said, it is okay, I will go with them. But in the meantime, I wanted to see my sister. So I went to Budapest and the head of the group gave me 2 hours. Budapest is a big city. And it took me a long time until I came to the place where my sister was. She was at that time by our aunt by the name Lebovich. She was there. We met for a very, very short time. And there I told her where I am going. We were together maybe a half an hour. And then I left. The whole group left with a boat to Eretz Israel. But on the way, the English, the British, we went with a boat which is called Anti-Serena. The English were watching and they did not let in people to Eretz Israel. They caught our boat, and from the boat, they did not let us go. They took us straight to Atlit. Atlit is a camp next to Haifa. So I was in this Atlit for a few weeks, many weeks, until somebody adopted us. Many people had cousins or relatives in Israel, but I had none. A non-religious kibbutz adopted me. adopted me, and I went to this kibbutz. In this kibbutz, I learned Ivrit, and I was working in the kibbutz for some times. Then later, my cousins, I put an ad in the papers, and my cousin read the ad that I am looking for cousins. They came, cousins, and brought me to their home. It was my cousin Yitzhak Adler, and Rachel Adler was accepting me to her house. It became my house. From there, I met my husband, Menachem. At that time, he was already in Israel for many years, and he was studying Ivrit to be a Hebrew teacher. He already was a teacher in Czechoslovakia, but he had to have exam in Ivrit so he can teach. In a short while, we got married. Thank God. I did not say too much about the Auschwitz. Thank God we got married. We have 2 children, Leah Feilhardt. Leah met her husband, Ellie, and Moshe met a wife, Phyllis Klein. They got married. They have their own children. I have, Baruch Hashem, 8 grandchildren and 12 great-grandchildren. Hitler Yamach Shemo did not win. I won. I won. I am happy alive. Thank you very much for listening to me. And to the children, to the young children, I give advice. I go to schools and I speak a lot about the Holocaust. And advice to the young children I am giving: do listen, be vigilant. The anti-Semitism, they do want harm to the Jewish people. Be aware, speak up, stand for the Jewish people. At the time when Hitler was, if Israel would have been in life, had been established, there would not have been Israel. So please stand up and listen. Help. Don't let harm to the Jewish people. Thank you very much for listening. I didn't say what's there. It's okay.
Thank you so much. And I believe that Moshe Roth will speak at this point.
Good evening. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I'm going to attenuate some of my prepared stuff, but I'd like to share a couple of things with you, because it's I think it's real important. Let's see if I can share the screen. So here's a map of Europe. You can see that Germany is right here. Okay, the Soviet Union had about 2.5 million Jews. Poland had about 3 million Jews. I was surprised to learn that Romania had about 1 million. Hungary had 450,000. Austria 250,000. They took Jews from as far as Greece. There were 100,000 there, and from France, and from Luxembourg, and from Great Britain. Originally, we were supposed to fly into Germany, but instead, flight was delayed, and we had to go into Warsaw. And then this.
Those places. That's why it didn't go on. But a lot of things which I wanted to tell him didn't.
So this was the turboprop that brought us from Hungary, from Warsaw down to Krakow. I got there. This was the hotel, and what was really interesting, perhaps you could see this. This is the elevator, and just seeing that was.
I think on the screen is only the map.
Okay, so let me reduce that. Can you see my screen now?
Also still just the map.
We just see a map.
Can you see me now?
We can see you, Moshe.
Okay, but you can't see. Okay.
No. For those who joined late while Moshe is looking, Moshe went back with his mother and his sister to Poland last year in January, right before COVID. And there was the commemoration ceremony for the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And I am seeing now pictures of Polish Airlines. That was the same airline that I had been on when we were on March of the Living in Poland in 1992.
Okay. Can you see this now?
Schindler elevator.
Right. So it was kind of like really chilling to see this because this is where his headquarters had been. There was a big banquet, and here we are, and a cousin's wife that we happened to see at the time are there. We weren't aware that she was going to be there, and it was really neat because the feeling was kind of not dour or sour, but rather it was kind of like a feeling of camaraderie. All of these people didn't know each other beforehand. Their children didn't know each other. But there was a feeling of everyone, there's a feeling of belonging. You can see here Ron Lauder spoke, and the president of the Ukraine spoke, the president of Poland spoke, and here, as my sister described, here was the ceremony in front of that very famous Birkenau entrance. J-Roots, as my sister mentioned, did a phenomenal job. They organized things so well, whether it's davening or the meals, and they just did a really good job. So what we had done is we had the opportunity to either go to Plaszów. Plaszów was a concentration camp, but unfortunately now there's not much that's there. So what we decided to do is we took a tour of the Krakow ghetto. Here's the main cathedral in Krakow, and here we're starting out in the ghetto. This is the hospital, the Jewish hospital, and you'll notice that this is where they had schooling. So even when they were in the ghetto, they resisted not only with arms, they resisted by getting food, they resisted by organizing hospitals. There was a Jewish council, they had schooling. So there were many different forms of resistance. Here you can see a building that didn't fare so well. The guy that took us to one corner and said, from this corner, you're able to see all four sides of where the ghetto was. He asked us to look around at the windows because each window represented 3 Jews. There were 40,000 Jews in a 4-block square area, and around the ghetto This is how the Germans kept the Jews in. At first, when you look at it, it looks like tablets, like Lishtei Luchot Abrit. It looks like the tablets. And but this was, like many things, just a facade, because what this was telling those who are inside is, this is where you're going. It's really a tombstone. And this is how despicable the Germans were. Here you can see this was in the old part of Krakow, in the Jewish part. Originally, the Jews were in a different area entirely. It's called Kizimers. It was over the river, and this shul was actually built in the 1500s, and it looks like a fortress because it was a fortress. Here we're looking at the square where all the Jews lived, and there were many shuls around this area. Here you can see there is a Hotel Esther, and the story here is quite chilling. There was one of the kings in that area had daughters only, and he didn't have an heir to his kingship. So what he did is he took a Jewish woman as a queen, and the story of Purim just repeated itself. A non-Jewish king takes a Jewish queen for his wife. Within the square, you can see this is the Ramah's shul of Rav Moshe Isserlis, and the Ramah was really amazing, and he was quite humble because he was about to write a sefer, a book of the laws of Ashkenazic Jewry. And then he received a copy of Rav Yosef Karo's Shulchan Aruch that he wrote for the Sfardim. So what Rav Moshe Isserlis did is, rather than rewriting or writing a new sefer, he simply annotated where the customs of the Jews in Europe differed. Here we're just looking at the outside, the facade, and you can see it's a relatively humble synagogue. Here we're inside the synagogue. You can see the shulchan. This is where obviously they read the Torah, and it's behind this ornate filigree. You can see the aron up front. Here's the aron. This guy happened to be originally from Omaha, Nebraska. He's part of J-Roots. J-Roots is a group of people that from Canada, from the States, from England, and their mantra is to take Jewish groups, whether it's synagogue groups or groups of kids from Israel, to places like Poland and Spain and Italy, where Jews had lived. This is quite telling and interesting. This is above the Aron. It says, Av HaRachamim, God of mercy, Hu Yirachem Amamusim, and he will protect those who are downtrodden. V'yiskor Brit Eitanim, and he will remember the covenant that the forefathers made with God. V'yatzil nafshotenu bizman hasha'ot haraot, and he will save our lives in times of terrible tragedy. How telling and prophetic that was. In the back of the synagogue, there's a cemetery, much as you would see in around the churches in New Jersey, where you have a cemetery. And here you can see straight ahead is the tombstone of Rav Moshe Isserlis, and next to him is his father. This is quite interesting because here there's the tomb of Gershon Shal Yom Tov Lippman Heller. He wrote a tremendous commentary on the Mishnayot, and it's called Tosfot Yom Tov. And you can see, and it's really beautiful, the epitaph that's written here. And you can see up on top, there's a pitcher of water, because obviously he was a Levi, and on their tombstones they would leave some sort of signal of who this person was. And the reason that Yom Tov Lippman Heller was buried in the back of the cemetery is because he wanted to be buried near Yasala the Miser. You've probably heard the story by Shlomo Karbach of Yasala the Miser. And it's a phenomenal story. And if you haven't heard it, please YouTube it and listen to it. And this great rabbi wanted to be buried near Yasala the Miser. Here you can see there's an active JCC, a Jewish Community Center in Krakow, even now. Here are pictures of the facades of buildings, and you can see they're quite beautiful. And the reason these buildings are not torn down is because the Polish army surrendered within 3 weeks. So the Germans had no need to bomb this area. So that's why you still see these beautiful buildings. Here, there's one of the synagogues, and you can see how ornate and how beautiful they are. It's just tremendous, and it was just a tremendous feeling just being there. It was really inspiring. And here you can see the Ezrat Nashim, again, how beautiful it was. And here's the back of the synagogue. And here we're walking out, and you can see some of the buildings have fallen and dilapidated. This was a yeshiva, and this was another yeshiva. It says Kovea Itim La Torah. The Jews lived in Europe for over 2,000 years. In 1933, the total Jewish population of Europe was about 9.5 million. And throughout the world, it was just a little bit over 15 million. So the 9.5 million Jews that lived in Europe represented more than 60% of world Jewry. Most European Jews lived in Eastern Europe. Again, the Nazis took power in 1933. And before that, Europe had a dynamic and highly developed Jewish culture. And a little more than a decade later, most European Jews, 2 out of every 3 Jews would be dead. Here you can see the famous entrance to Auschwitz, where you can see it says Arbeit macht frei. Work will make you free. And this was yet another deception. And you can look, if you look here, right here, and where the letter B, and the letter B is upside down. And what that signals is that the person who was the foundry worker and who made this sign protested and was protesting. And he said, gee, things are a bit upside down. So there were many different forms of resistance. And here you can see we walked through Auschwitz, and you can kind of just picture thousands and thousands of people that were here. And you can kind of imagine that there were German soldiers holding machine guns and just tormenting these people. These were workshops. You can see the chimneys of these workshops. And here we're just walking through Auschwitz. Auschwitz was originally a Polish army camp, and then it was taken over by the Germans. It was just terribly moving just being there. And in some of the buildings we were able to go through, and you can just imagine soldiers and throngs of people that were just there. Here's one of the survivors that was relaying his story. This is a very telling picture. Here, there's the tour guide is pointing out, and on the next picture you can see Auschwitz was the center, and you can see up on top Warsaw, and they would ship people to Auschwitz, and Lvov, and Khust, and Munkach, and these were huge Jewish cities. Bratislava and Budapest, and they took Jews from even Rome and from Paris and from Brussels, from all around, and they literally concentrated them, and that's why it's called a concentration camp. And here you can see my mother's pointing to Khust, where she was an apprentice, and she described before how she learned how to make shaitlach. Here, and this you can see Auschwitz was the largest Nazi German concentration camp, and since 1942, also a mass extermination center for Jews. In the years 40 to 45, the Nazis deported at least 1,300,000 people to Auschwitz, and you can see the vast majority were Jews, and there were about 200,000 others that were Poles and Gypsies and Soviet prisoners of war. And bit over 1 million of these people died in Auschwitz. About 90% of these were Jews, and the SS murdered the majority of them in the gas chamber.
Can I just interject for a moment, Moshe?
Please do.
When I was there in 1992 and we were in Auschwitz, there was no mention of the fact that there were Jews in the concentration camp. It was citizens from other countries, intellectuals from other countries, Dr. Weiss, Dr. Cohen, Dr. Goodman, but no mention of Jews. So this is stuff that took place after I was there in 92. Initially, there was really no recognition by the Polish government that anything had happened to their Jewish population. It was just to the Polish population. They were the victims. Not one mention of the word Jew the entire trip. It's crazy. By the Polish guides.
Thank you. So you can see the estimated number of Jews deported to Auschwitz: 430 from Hungary, 300,000 from Poland, 70,000 from France, 60,000 from the Netherlands, et cetera, et cetera. It's just gut-wrenching. Here there's a watchtower. And again, I can just picture German soldiers, running around with their pistols and their rifles and their machine guns. This is a very important model. Okay, I used to think that the gas chamber and the crematoria was one and the same, but actually these are two different parts, and it's really important to understand this. Down here toward the center, where I have it centered, that was the gas chamber, and you can see there are models of people. And here in the center, I'm trying to point out, I hope you can see my cursor, there's what looks like a chimney and another chimney. And these were actually not chimneys, but rather where they would drop down the Zyklon B, the gas that would kill. And then afterwards, it was the Sonderkommandos, Jews that were left alive for maximum of 3 months. And their job was to grab the bodies and to take them out of the gas chamber and here into this building. And you'll see this building later on because the Germans, in an attempt to erase this, they blew up this building. But these Sonderkommandos had to take these bodies out and remove them. This is just another view of people that are walking down here, down the staircase. And there were who knows how many hundreds of people that were gassed at a time. This is a picture of the Zyklon gas canisters that they would drop down, the death canisters. Here you can see pictures of hair, because they would weave hair within fabrics in order to serve as insulation. Here it's difficult to see, but this is just hair. And they shorn everyone. And you just have hair and thousands and thousands of pounds of just hair. You can just imagine. Here there's a map on the bottom. You can see it says Auschwitz I, which was the work camp. And that's why it says light industry. And Birkenau, which was Auschwitz II, which was the death camp. Eyeglasses from thousands and thousands of people. Talesim, people came with their Jewish identity. Here there were thousands of prostheses, people that came with crutches and different prosthetics. You can see people came with food, and these are porcelain bowls so that they could eat on the way. And this is most telling. These are shoes. And the Germans were so diabolical that they kept the shoes. And here you can see that there's suitcases, and they told people, write your names because you'll be able to go back and find them, and put your clothes when you go into the gas chamber. Remember what number hook you have so you can get back to your clothes. You can just imagine the 2 or 3 year old that was wearing this. shoes, and shoes. I'm just going to walk you through this. Okay, this is about the size of our social hall in our shul. And you can see how many thousands and thousands of pairs of shoes. And it was just diabolical to you can just imagine how many people were in those shoes. Here we're just continuing to walk through. Here there was a railroad rail where they would hang prisoners. And here you can see signs. And like Helen said before, they didn't acknowledge, but here you can see the signs. This is in Polish, and this is obviously in English. And down here you can see it in Hebrew, because there are many people that come during the army or after the army, and they come to visit to pay their respects. Again, just walking through, and the barbed wire is still there. And again, you can just imagine. Here you can see the gallows, okay? This is where Hearst was the commandant of the camp, and after the war, this is where they hung him, right next to where the crematoria was. Here you can see the chimney of the crematoria, and here there's an explanation. Before the war, the building was a munition bunker, but from 1940 to 1943, the SS used this as a crematorium. In the autumn of 41, the largest room, which had been designated by the German authorities as a morgue, was adapted for use as an improvised gas chamber. And again, you can see the Hebrew on the bottom. And this is a model. On this side, you can see this is where the gas chamber was. And you can see this is where the ovens were. Now we're stepping right into the gas chamber. So this is where you can just kind of picture where they gassed hundreds of people, and here's where they would burn their bodies in these ovens. Here, this is the outside of what I showed you before in terms of where the steps were to walk down into the gas chamber. And here you can see the length of the gas chamber. You can just imagine this. Here you're looking down at the length of the gas chamber. They even placed a pool here to kind of fool the people, as though this is like some sort of summer camp. And here you can see the watchtower. And here we're walking through Birkenau. And as my sister said, much of Birkenau was taken apart by the Poles, and they used the wood for whatever reason, whether it's for heat or building. Here you can see one of the other survivors. And this is the crematoria, okay? This is what the Germans bombed, okay? They tried to destroy, they tried to erase their tracks. And it's kind of interesting because here I'm going to play what they played at the time. You can hear them singing the Hatikva. Hatikva means the hope. So this song, this anthem that became Israel's anthem, was actually known beforehand. And people sang this. Our hope is 2,000 years. We hope to be a free nation in our own land. You can hear them singing this in Polish. So they wanted to really understand what it was that they were saying. took both my cell phone and my palmcorder to take pictures and videos. And as soon as I returned, I was very careful to download the videos onto an external hard drive because those last forever, right? Okay. I figured that was safer than storing it on my laptop. The hard drive kept giving me notices that I had 100 gigs of memory remaining. I didn't pay attention to it. Unfortunately, my hard drive failed and I lost all of those videos. All I had was what was on my phone. I spoke to the company and I sent my hard drive to the company because they told me that very often they're able to retrieve these videos. I felt a sense of loss. I was angry at myself for not paying attention to the warnings, but then it dawned on me, there's a lesson to be learned here. It was almost divine. There was an ironic lesson. I had wanted to save these videos so I can go back and relive this experience through the videos. I ignored the hard drive warning me that it was about to fill up, much as there were warnings of the Holocaust that was impending. Some saw the writing on the wall and they left Europe. Many pleaded with the Jews to wake up before it was too late. Begin and Ben Gurion and Trumpeldor and Jabotinsky. My father left Europe in 1937 before the war and he went to Palestine. The hard drive manufacturers reassured me that they're often able to retrieve these videos, much as the Germans tried to reassure and brainwash the Jews that they were only being relocated. The lost videos are like the lost memories and the lost family members, the lost towns and the cities that would never come back. The warnings were the writing on the wall. Remember, the Nazis took over in 1933. My father was one of those few that read the writing on the wall, and he followed his brother to what was then Palestine. The rest ignored the warnings, much as I ignored the hard drive warnings. I only lost videos. I got off easy. They lost family members, parents and siblings, wives and children. They had no pictures to remember them. Each community, and there were thousands of them, had their own tradition. We lost Chazanah. We lost Minhagim. I remember Mr. Raskin singing Kel Male Rachamim. My father had a unique tune for the Kaddish after Rosh Hashanah davening. I'm probably going to be the last one that's going to use that tune. My father described that there was a room just off of the shul that had different parochets for each holiday. We have a different parochet for Rosh Hashanah, but they had a different parochet for Sukkot, for Hanukkah, for Pesach, for Shavuot. What we have now is simply a hodgepodge, a conglomeration. We've got memories, but there's nothing to go back to. Europe is just one big cemetery. We can have our sour grapes and say Hitler didn't win because we have yeshivas and shuls. We have our yeshiva university in Arturo. We have Muncie and Brooklyn, and we've got Highland Park and West Orange. And Art Scroll has done a tremendous job. But we have to be realist. We have a lot, but we lost a lot. 2 out of every 3 Jews were exterminated. I'm fortunate. I've had the benefit of having my mother throughout my adult life and going through this experience with her. Baruch Hashem, she merited to have children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and to have a close relationship with each of them. She was able to write her memoirs, My Eyes Looking Back at Me. That's available on Amazon. And even the title of the book has a story of why it was chosen. Those who were much younger than my mother at the time didn't survive. Those who were just a little bit older than my mother were likely married and had children. They all didn't survive. Those that did survive did so due to divine providence. Hakol bidei shamayim, everything is in God's hands. Those that were my mother's age but were weaker were not selected to go to work camp. They didn't survive. My mother was already in the gas chamber, and perchance there was a delay in putting that group to death because there was a higher priority to exterminate a group of children, perhaps those children from Theresienstadt. And my mother and the others in the gas chamber were let out. All those that survive have stories like that, running out of one line and into another, or being partisans, or somehow evading or escaping. 6 million of a total of 9.5 million. I recently saw a post where a survivor said, the Nazis took away my youth and COVID has taken away my senior years. When Begin spoke with Carter, he begged for weapons, He said, my people were tresimated. Carter didn't understand the term. President Carter knew the term decimated. The prefix decimated is deci, meaning a multiple of 10. A decade is 10 years. A decimeter is a tenth of a meter. A decimal is a tenth. To decimate means to kill 1 out of every 10 prisoners. Hitler captured the psyche of the Germans. He eliminated 1 out of every 3 Jews in the world. Think of how devastating it would have been if he used his force just to fight the other armies, the Americans and the Soviets, rather than divide his resources and fight on 2 fronts while simultaneously annihilating a huge percentage of Jews. If he had used his forces to fight the Axis and won, then he would have had free reign to keep in even more Jews. In a diabolical way, similar to the hijackers that brought down the Twin Towers, he was able to wreak havoc on us. Obviously, there was a plan, and one can say that anti-Semitism was the glue that galvanized the Germans. We can't and we shouldn't live in the past. We have to embrace the future. The saying goes, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. A patient of mine was fond of saying, the past is history, the future is a mystery, but the present is a gift. We need to live in the now, but it's also important to remember our past and know where we come from. In Pirkei Avot it says, Da me'ayin bata, u'la'an tashuv, v'lifnei mi ata atid litain did v'cheshbon. Know where you come from and where you ultimately will be, and before whom you'll stand to be judged. So much of Judaism is connecting with the past. We light 2 candles on Shabbat because we remember Shamor and Zachor. In Kiddush, we acknowledge that God created the world, but we also say, Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim, to remember going out of Egypt. The shofar on Rosh Hashanah is to remember what Abraham was willing to sacrifice. We built Sukkot to remember the Sukkot that our forefathers built in the desert. We light 8 candles on Hanukkah to remember the nace of Hanukkah. We eat latkes fried in oil to remember the miracle of the oil. On Purim, we remember the dire straits that the Jews were in when they were in Shushan. We remember the foods. We remember the poor. Pesach is all about remembering. And Helen said, as she said before, we always say, V'gadat lebincha b'yom hahu lemor. Relay the story to your children so that they can tell the story to their children. I titled this talk, Bayamin Hahem Bazman Hazeh. In those days, in our time, because what Haman wanted to do, Hitler was able to accomplish. On Purim, we have so many ways that we're indoctrinated in order to remember. We read the Megillah, we make sounds, we make noise when Haman's name is said. We give Mishloach Manot. We eat a festive meal. There are already Holocaust deniers. What will happen to remembering the Holocaust? How will we be able to pass this to our children? I leave you with this call to action. We've likely been on vacations to places no doubt you've enjoyed, whether it's Disney or seeing the Golden Gate Bridge or the Grand Canyon or Cancun or Hawaii. You can see documentaries about these places, but there's a quantum difference in actually being there. One of the factors that characterize millennials nowadays is they seek and value the experiences rather than materials things. And there's a value to that. Along those lines, consider taking a trip with a guide to Poland and Europe. If you seek spirituality, if you're seeking connection to your roots, if you're looking for meaning, then visit some of those camps in notable cities. Each camp has its own personality. Obviously, this is very different than taking a trip or a cruise for pleasure. There are groups that are organized through shuls and the like. J-Roots and other companies organize these types of trips. That experience will enrich your life and your understanding of our past and connecting with it, with the hopes that it will help you gain an enriched and better future.
Thank you. At the conclusion of this program, Josh will lead us in singing Ani Ma'amin. Josh?
Ani Ma'amin B'emunah Shleima B'vias HaMashiach Ani Ma'amin B'emunah Shleima B'vias HaMashiach Ani Ma'amin B'emunah Shleima B'vias HaMashiach V'af al pi she'yismamea hachakelo b'chol yom she'yavo V'af al pi she'yismamea hachakelo b'chol yom she'yavo.
Thank you all for joining us this evening. Good night.